Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Sustaining Sustainability. I'm your host, CB Bhattacharya, Professor and Director of the Center for Sustainable Business at the University of Pittsburgh. This week, I'm delighted to say that I'm joined from London, England, by Adam Woodhall, Chief Executive and Founder of Lawyers for Net Zero. Adam is an entrepreneur and climate expert with 15 years of experience delivering climate action, both with cleantech startups and household names such as PwC, Network Rail, and Allianz Insurance. In 2020, he realized that the legal sector, particularly in-house counsel, was a largely untapped driver for achieving net zero. The Lawyers for Net Zero initiative now has over 100 in-house lawyers, with many high-profile champions taking part in their impact program, including from organizations such as Standard Chartered Bank, GSK, Nestle, and Rolls Royce. Adam, welcome to the show.
Delighted to meet you, CB.
So Adam, you launched Lawyers for Net Zero about 1 year after the pandemic began. What led to your decision to launch this organization during this time of global upheaval?
There's many influential people in our society that if you ask them, what are you doing to help drive the climate agenda? Typically, they would either give you the kind of party line of what their company is doing, which is great, but they weren't really kind of personally engaged with it. Or they'd go, yes, I'll tell you what I'm doing. I'm getting an electric car, the next car that I'm getting. Or I took a keep cup to work today. Is that what you mean? And actually, the problem was because basically many people are disempowered from using their day job to actually drive the action that's necessary, because you kind of think, well, there's a sustainability team, they've got it, or like the CEO knows what they're doing, or the government needs to sort this out, and it's not my job. And even if it is, I don't know what to do. So what I recognized was that what we needed to do was work with professionals and other key influential people that are at the center of their organizations. You know, it's crazy if I'm going to try and kind of influence all kind of professional sectors in one go. So then it was like clear, right, let's focus on the legal sector. And then the more that I focused on the legal sector, the more that I realized was what the people that have the real influence in the legal sector are actually the ones that are the lawyers that are inside the large organizations. So the in-house counsel or in-house lawyers, which are kind of interchangeable terms. And where actually the pandemic actually kind of ironically helped was because we were setting up from scratch. What it meant is that we could have conversations with people, and people, I'm based in London. People would say, normally historically, let's meet for coffee, which is great, but it's actually, unfortunately, not a very effective use of time. But actually, if you just say, let's meet for a virtual coffee, you could do that in half an hour, where it might take 2 hours to go to a meeting, have the coffee, go away. So and what it also meant was, I think, because of all that upheaval, people were more sensitive to the fact that this is something that we really need to take action on, what's represented by net zero. And so that upheaval actually, ironically, gave us an opportunity to turn what my idea into something approximating reality.
Now, as you alluded, the purpose of Lawyers for Net Zero is to energize and equip in-house counsel globally to champion and enable legitimate net zero. How does this purpose inform the daily actions of the organization?
The daily actions that we're really focused on is largely in two areas. The first is what you'd kind of expect from an organization called Lawyers for Net Zero, which is effectively advocacy for the fact that we absolutely have to be taking action to help keep a livable planet for all, and also that in-house lawyers are uniquely placed to be able to work with that and do something with it because of their situation in their organization is actually how we interact directly with senior in-house lawyers. Particularly the general counsel is typically the most senior lawyer in an organization, and they lead the legal team, as well as actually often leading other members of the organization, such as ethics or corporate compliance or company secretary. What we recognize is that we need to work directly with those individuals to support them on their journey.
So you highlight the role of in-house counsel as ESG leaders. Tell us how in-house counsel are uniquely positioned to influence authentic environmental, social, and governance progress and avoid greenwashing.
The in-house lawyers, they're actually, then people don't really notice them, but they're actually really important because they work at the center of the business. They're one of the very few functions in a large organizations which sits cross-functional. So they can get over the siloization problem because they have to be, because most of their organization needs support regarding the legal aspects. What it is that they have an opportunity to be basically professionally curious. That is their role to do that. So they can ask questions that maybe other people can't ask questions. And so it's their job also to kind of horizon scan and really be the kind of ethical compass for their organization, because it's part of their job to look at the risks and through that also maybe opportunities that come from action or inaction on environmental, social, and governance. And a really good example around this is greenwashing, when organizations exaggerate or misrepresent their environmental progress. And there's increasing numbers of organizations which are actually being targeted by, whether it's the government regulators, the activist organizations, for the fact that they're doing this exaggeration. And in Europe, actually, one particularly big example, a subsidiary of Deutsche Bank, a company called DWS, which is Germany's biggest fund holder. And Deutsche Bank is Germany's biggest bank. They actually had 50 German police turn up to do a dawn raid on their offices. Now, that was really big because that dawn raid was to try and find evidence of the fact that they were basically misrepresenting massively their ESG funds. Basically, they were saying that something like, say, around about half of their funds were ESG, when in fact only maybe about a quarter of the funds were ESG. That happened because of a whistleblower, that somebody at the center of the business knew that this was happening, knew that this was something that was wrong. And so they were telling their colleagues that this is a problem, but their colleagues were ignoring it. And at some point, some of the lawyers in the company will have known that this was happening. And those lawyers, for whatever reason, chose to not use their position of influence to say, guys, this could cause lots of problems. And it ended up doing and causing massive problems to that company. And basically, because of that, the CEO of that company resigned immediately. And also it had a big impact on their share price. So it's through those sorts of things that the in-house counsel can really have an influence on making sure that organizations are steering correctly to avoid that greenwashing.
That's a powerful story indeed. And I do remember reading about that in the papers. Now, so championing legitimate net zero, and I imagine what you mean by that is not offsetting your way to net zero. So that's your primary function. Where have you seen your programming impact decarbonization efforts? And where do you hope it will impact decarbonization in alignment with the UN net zero goals by 2050?
So what it is net zero is a journey. It's the destination is quite a long way in the future. And what they're looking at is how can they be kind of influencing, because it's not their job to kind of be able to see directly exactly what's happened, because obviously they're not the head of sustainability. They aren't somebody who is able to say to their colleagues, right, we're going to change this directly, but they can do influencing. And I think that's the most important thing that to offer for all of the listeners, because I'm guessing most of the listeners won't be in-house lawyers, is actually about how you can influence on your position in your organization by, maybe you being professionally curious, as I've suggested that the lawyers can be. And so it's really thinking about things such as the things that we offer them, which is like, make sure that you're delivering applicable risk advice, such as regarding not just reputational or litigation, but also is there a risk of discontented employees because they're frustrated by their organization's greenwashing, or in fact, actually more seriously, production risk, because basically that factories or offices are being flooded or losing power. Your supply chain is being massively disrupted because of severe weather conditions, which has happened this year in China, for example. They can put in policies to help guard against this, but then also really think through this. So, for example, one of the things that we support them to consider is how disclosure and reporting is important, but it also can be used unintentionally, and maybe intentionally sometimes, but generally unintentionally. Disclosure and reporting can hide harm or even distract from action, because you've got all this great report and you're pointing at something that you're doing really well, but you're not looking at the things that actually your organization's doing, which is directly contributing to the climate crisis.
So you structure your programming with peer-to-peer champion groups. How does this collaborative learning approach across businesses facilitate your targeted outcomes?
But peer-to-peer is so important, because what it is that you can read something you can see a celebrity on TV, or David Attenborough, listen to a podcast with him, and it's powerful. But then you're kind of left going, what am I going to do? How am I going to deal with this? From my both personal experience and also some deep research and the support, actually, we've got a world-leading neuroscientist who's a key advisor for us, is that peer-to-peer is unparalleled in its ability to be able to enable people to go from kind of like, well, what can I do? To actually within just a few months feeling huge amounts of agency. What you need is actually people to see other people that are like them working together. You're in there together, because then you can feel the same sort of challenges and opportunities that you've got. And what's really, it's almost magical to see, is that if we give them some support and guidance at the start, then they start to see that, yeah, somebody else is doing the same thing as me. They're having the same problems as me, but also it's really great because they can celebrate their successes. They can learn from each other, but really importantly, actually, it provides accountability and motivation.
Yeah, in fact, this is amazing, because it reminds me of what we are trying to do at our Center for Sustainable Business, where we bring companies together who engage in kind of peer-to-peer learning and go back with that learning into their organizations to drive sustainable change. So interesting overlaps on many fronts. Much of the pushback on net zero initiatives suggests that it'll be bad for business or workers. So why is framing your mission of keeping a livable planet for all worth potential short-term adjustments or trade-offs?
Clearly, there are people whose livelihoods, whose communities are based on fossil fuels, especially, for example, around coal in many countries. That has a consequence. If we shut down those coal plants, those people are not going to have a job anymore. And what we've got to do is we've got to look at this on a kind of like a global societal level. Is that if we prioritize the needs of every single individual in the short term, unfortunately, we won't get much change happening. And we've got to respect and honor the fact that they've got jobs which are important and worthy in many senses, but also if those jobs and those businesses are leading to existential damage to our ecosystem, then we need to think about how we create those compromises and work with this. But this is where we need a joined up approach, so that government is not just providing carrots to the renewables companies or sticks to the big fossil companies, but also they're supporting and nurturing communities which are going to be impacted by this. Principle 5 of our net zero action principles, which is champion net zero to your peers, industry and regulators, and through that actually government. So what we want our champions to be doing is to be saying to their regulatory authorities, their governments, guys, we need to be changing. You need to be helping us with this, and we need to be working together on that, because one of the things that, there is plenty of money in this world to be able to make the transformation happen. If Meta can spend $15 billion creating an alternative reality, and they think there might be some money in creating an alternative reality, if they can spend $15 billion on punting on that, surely we can find vast amounts of money and desire to do that. Because whilst our planet has limited resources, it has limited carrying capacity for example, carbon, what we do have is unlimited passion, creativity, and care for each other and our planet. So it's about how we use that the unlimited resources to work with those resources which are intrinsically limited.
And maybe you alluded to this already, but what call to action would you make to our listeners?
How can you use your influence in the job where you are to drive change? Now, for you, it might be talking to your company about its pension scheme. It's where it's investing its money, going beyond the things that we all know we can do personally, such as the electric cars, the keep cups, etc. Those are great, do those, but that's kind of hygiene. Help your organization really take a big step up to drive the necessary change that we need to keep that livable planet.
Adam Woodhall, thank you so much for taking some of your precious time and spending it with us today.
Absolutely delighted. It's been great to talk to you, CB.
And this is your host, CB Bhattacharya, saying goodbye, and I look forward to seeing you on our next edition of Sustaining Sustainability. And before I sign off, I do want to say this podcast is made possible with the help of my colleagues Chris Gassman, Senior Associate Director at the Center for Sustainable Business, and Kristen P. Ahern, Center Program Manager. I'm your host, CB Bhattacharya, and I hope to see you again in a few weeks for another edition of Sustaining Sustainability.